Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us here for a little live tasting. Unnecessarily live in some ways. You could do this without it being live. You can do this later if you don't want to do it right now, if it's some weird time in the morning. If you haven't got your kit yet, I know there's been some logistical challenges around the world with different kits. Being live is just a nicety. It's not an essential of this whole process. Anyway, welcome. There's a lot of you out there. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping first. I think that's probably important. Firstly, I would probably avoid using the super chat feature on YouTube. YouTube just takes a very large cut of that money. If you really desperately want to ask a question, I can't guarantee we'll answer it because we have a limited amount of time. There is a Just Giving page where if people are up for donating, instead of giving it to YouTube and the channel, we're raising money for World Coffee Research. We can talk a bit more about them later on. You don't have to donate. You've bought a kit, thank you so much for participating. But we will be keeping an eye over there if you want to ask a question, and we'll try and answer them as best we can, but avoid the YouTube super chat. They get enough, they don't need any more. Anyway, I'll walk you through what we're going to do today. We're going to taste 4 coffees. I think you know we're going to taste 4 coffees, that's not a big surprise. I'll kind of take our time to do it. There's no mad rush. At times I might get ahead of you today. I might be doing something and you're not ready to do it. Don't worry, I should probably be ahead of you. You can get ahead of me if you want to as well. If you know what you're doing, you can just surge right ahead, that's fine. The goal for today, first and foremost, for me anyway, is to taste something new. Like, this is just a really interesting opportunity to taste something new. It had been outside of the tiny handful of people who worked in decaf factories, just something you couldn't do. Take one coffee and decaf it multiple ways and taste it side by side. It's just interesting. I've had a lot of opinions about decaf processes over the years. Am I about to invalidate all of them? Perhaps so. We're also going to learn about our own preferences. Every time we do a tasting like this, you can learn a little bit something about what you like and understand your own preferences more. That's another kind of goal for today. Final goal, obviously just develop our own sense of taste, develop our skill around tasting. Any comparative tasting is a good opportunity to do that. Now, these 4 bowls will be the coffee I'll do most of the tasting with. But I was aware that because we have 60-ish roasters participating around the world, if I'm just tasting one roaster's roast of the coffee, well, I'm not getting the full picture. I couldn't practically do 60 roasters times 4 coffees, but over here, I have a little matrix of different roasters. And so I've got a line of caffeinated coffees from 6 different roasters, a line of, I think what's next, CR3, the CO2 process, the ethyl acetate, and the Swiss water. So when we get to tasting later on, I'll try and speak not just about what I'm tasting in terms of this one roast, but more broadly in terms of trends that I might taste across a few different roasters. It's been interesting to see, just weighing these out and prepping them, a lot of different approaches to roasting amongst the different roasters here. So I think that's going to be interesting to see which parts of the decaf shine through the different kind of roast approaches that roasters have, because there's no right way to roast coffee. There's just the way that you think tastes nice. Okay, let's get into it. Things I do want you to worry about. Take your time today. Don't feel rushed at any point. Just take your time and enjoy this thing. There'll be moments you feel like you're rushing. There's no need to do that. Ignore other people. If you see, the chat will have a lot of opinions. Don't worry too much about the chat. Don't worry about people you're with. Try not to talk during the first bit of tasting. It's quite useful just to pay attention to nothing but what you're experiencing. It's valid. And then with the score sheet, if you're using a score sheet, you kind of want to turn little differences into big numbers here, right? So a lot of tasting, we'll talk about this, is comparative. You might be like, oh, that's like a 6 out of 6 on the acidity scale, and that's kind of similar, but it's slightly more acidic. Maybe is it a 7? Lean into the differences. You know what I mean? Like, score the ones that feel sweeter or more acidic or heavier, whatever it is. Just give them a bit of weighting on that, because they're very similar in a lot of ways. The same raw coffee. So lean into the kind of bigger differences. Don't be afraid to score things higher and lower, just to help you understand and note down what you're tasting. I brought my score sheet, of course. I'm joining in too. Can't read my writing, it's good. But we will be tasting with this. Now, In the little intro thing, it said you can weigh your beans out. I haven't weighed mine out because I know a lot of people like to hand grind. And in previous tastings, I've started grinding and they're just freaking out because they're still hand grinding the first one and I'm pouring water on things and they're feeling way behind. I'm going to weigh out my coffee in a second. But if you've weighed out your coffee, you can start grinding it now. That's totally okay. Don't obsess over the perfect grind setting. This is one of the niceties of cupping. It's pretty tolerant on a range of grind sizes, and actually loads of roasters have different approaches to grind settings for cuppings. There's no right answer here. As long as they're all on the same grind setting, I think you're okay. Where am I at? I'm probably a touch finer than a kind of 2-cup V60 in that kind of 1-cup V60 range. If you want a reference point, that's kind of where I'm at. You can go a little coarser, you can go a little finer. The window is pretty wide. All right, last thing not to worry about. Don't worry about trying to perfectly describe everything in terms of flavor or experience. Don't stress out. It's just a bit of fun. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put 12 grams of coffee in each of these bowls from each of these ones here. So this will be my caffeinated lot, CO2 lot, EA, and Swiss water. I call it EA often because it's a habit at this point. Anyway, I'm going to weigh that out. As I said, if you have a grinder that's a slow grinder, don't be afraid to get straight into it and start grinding now. As I weighed these out the other day, or for those bowls over there, it was so interesting to see the different kind of roast development approaches from different roasters. Really super different, which is kind of fun. All right. I'll be honest, I can't keep up with the chat. I'm not even going to try. I would also say, I'll do this in a minute, if you've got quite a lot of water in your kettle, start that off now. You can obsess over water when it comes to coffee. If you've got one of the third wave water sachets, I know a bunch of roasters sent those out. I quite like those at normal strength. I quite like them at half strength, so the 2 litre sachet into sort of 4 litres. Again, the ideal is that you're using the same thing across all 4 coffees. I'm not sure there's an ideal water for a decaf cupping. We've got some, some custom recipe water, but we're broken a little bit inside. I say we. Anyway. Now, in hindsight, I sort of do regret not blinding these because I thought the caffeinated looks quite different, the beans look quite different, but it would have been kind of fun to get people to do these a little bit more blind. You can do them blind if you want to. You can mix it up and see what happens. I'm curious if people could have spotted the decaf or the calf or not. Right. Now, behind me, I have a grinder. The grinder's a little bit noisy. I'll let you know that now. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to turn my sound down just a little bit when I grind coffee, just because otherwise it's very loud. Oh, and I'm going to boil a kettle. Da-da-da-da. Go. Right, and then I just need to prep my other kettle. Oh, I see we have a little a camera, little flub in there. Forgive us. Right. If you've never done a cupping before, it's very simple. Ground coffee in a bowl, we're going to pour boiling water on top of it, just off the boil. Don't freak out too much about water temperature at this point. And then we're just going to let them sit for about 4 minutes, doing nothing. A crust's going to form, and that'll be our first opportunity to get to know the coffee a little bit. How am I going? All right. Lovely, I'm just going to check in on you. Lovely folks, I hope everyone's going along, everyone's tracking okay. There's no mad rush here. We're going to work for about 4 minutes. Just a second, I'm going to get my other kettle and I'll pour these out. How much water? You're looking at 60 grams a litre is the typical goal. So these, we know that with coffee in them, and top them up, you'll get about 200 mils in there. You can weigh them out as you go. That's a thing, that's an option. Let me just grab my, thank you. Right, other kettle. Now I will say, have a little smell along here at this point as these crusts have formed. You start to pick out some differences. Now this is the same coffee, so that don't expect massive differences in how they smell. Maybe some variance in the roast coming through, but it's interesting. All right, what I might do is move this out of the way for a second, see if we can top it up and put it on again. Let's have another smell. Now, as a little trick, what you'll often find is that your nose kind of gets saturated with the smell of coffee pretty quickly. So by the time you get down here, you're finding a lack of difference is kind of frustrating. What I think works well is to smell something quite different to coffee to kind of reset the nose. Ironically, the perfume industry uses coffee for this sort of exact purpose. So often when you're smelling different perfumes, they'll use ground coffee to kind of reset your nose, give you something totally different to smell, and then go back to the next perfume. I historically used to smell like clothes because they had detergent on them, and that smelled quite different. It was a bit of a weird thing to do, I know. But something non-coffee to smell between them is really interesting to kind of provide some additional contrast. Now, once they're brewed for 4 minutes or so, which is about now, we end the brewing process. Now it's interesting here, just looking at these bowls quickly, you can see this one to me looks like a normal cupping bowl. The crusts have fallen on these two but not on this one. Can you read into that? You probably can. It just says to me that the coffees are different in some way. Lighter roasts tend to kind of fall a little earlier, the crusts don't stay as long. Is that the case here? I don't know. Anyway, get your spoon, you're going to get your nose down here and just gently mix the bowl 3 times and there'll be a nice release of aroma. It's very enjoyable. Don't worry too much about this. If a word pops into your head, write it down. If a word doesn't pop into your head, don't stress out about it. It's just fun. This I always found quite intimidating when I was getting into coffee, this kind of part of the process. But ultimately, it doesn't matter that much. You know what I mean? The taste is what really matters. So anyway. Oh, I haven't got a rinsing bowl. I have to get a rinse. You know, you think you've done this so many times in your life. You do it live in front of thousands of people and you forget simple things. Like a little bowl to rinse your spoon with. Oh yeah, right. Some interesting differences there. I'm just going to give these bowls a quick stir, because they also need to be prepped, and then we'll pour the last ones after. Now a lot of these have fallen down, which is interesting. You still want to give them a little stir just to add that agitation as a consistency, a sort of point of similarity across all your brews. Wonder if my water temp was maybe a touch low on these ones. We'll find out. Okay. Let's have a little look, see what you got, some tasting notes, smelling notes going on here. Don't worry about those rinsing cups. All right, now, this is the next part of the fun. Before you can taste your cupping bowl, you want to get rid of this stuff on top. If you followed the French press technique that we made on the channel many years ago, this is not a huge surprise that this is what you do, but you essentially just scoop off any sudsy bits on top. Oops, wrong thing. Be all right. Now, these bowls are too hot to taste, and that's fine because I've got some other jobs, like cleaning up the mess I just made. Right, let's have another rinsing bowl. There we go. Just, you know, you've done thousands of these in your life and yet you forget the basics. Right, come on, let's do another quick clean of these bowls. What I used to love watching were the real cupping professionals, the ones at Origin, who, some of them could do a single bowl clean. I could never understand the single bowl clean. They would just seemingly just have a little, with one spoon. I could never do the one spoon. It's always a mystery. out of interest, in the chat, let us know if this is your first coffee tasting ever. Or kind of cupping, so to speak. It's a funny word. Lovely. Chair out of the way. Over here. Lots of first timers. Oh, I love to see it. Love to see it. All right, let me just finish pouring these bowls, hopefully. And God, I've got a lot of coffee to taste today. Oh dear. Lucky, it's mostly decaf. Oh yeah, sorry about the random beep that you'll hear now and again. One of the downsides of being in a roastery, in a commercial space. There's lots of strange things happening. Usually you don't have to pour from this high, but usually you're not trying to do 30 bowls all stacked together. Get in there. Oh, it's going to be close on the water. May we commit the cardinal sin of not filling a bowl entirely? Oh, I am. One. Perfection. Okay. Now these will be a little hot to taste. I wouldn't go in. These are 10 minutes now. Which is a bit hot. Now when it comes to tasting, coffee is going to change a lot. These in particular are going to change a lot over the period of time in which we're tasting them. So I would say you want to wait until maybe 15 minutes before starting. Now I have an advantage here. I'm in a very cold room. This is a coffee roasting space. It's a miserable winter's day outside. The roasting machines are not running, and this room is built around machines that usually are running and kicking out a bit of heat. So it's pretty chilly in here, and that means my cupping bowls will get cooler much faster, but I'd still say that they're probably a little bit hot. Let me just give you a little reset. Keep an eye on you. But the technique we'll be using today. If you are familiar with the channel, you're probably familiar with the slurping. And when it comes time to me slurping, especially these, I'm wearing a microphone, it's very close to my face. The slurp is a very intense sound. So when we get into the tasting matrix and I'm kind of trying to work out how everything tastes, I will turn my volume down for that. And the rest of the time I'll be a little bit more gentle. Your spoon can be any spoon. It can be a teaspoon, it can be a dessert spoon, it can be a cupping spoon, a coffee spoon if you've got one. They're kind of fun. What you're trying to do is turn up the volume on what you're tasting. Wine people do it in their own way. I think tea people do it in their own way. We do it by slurping the liquid off a spoon to try and spray it and send as much stuff volatile as we can to sort of turn up the retronasal side of the tasting experience. When it comes to the classic tastes, things like acidity or sweetness, cupping isn't going to make that much difference, I don't think. A little bit, but not very much. It should, however, kind of turn up the aromas in the coffee a little bit more, and that's where it's helpful. When you're tasting, what we're going to do is we're going to work slowly and methodically and outside of the slurpy noises, relatively quietly. Try not to talk to each other if you're with other people. Take your time. The first time you taste everything, don't expect to have huge insights. Do expect to be slightly freaked out that things taste similar, and can you even tell the difference? They're hot, it's much harder when they're hot. And have a little taste of this one here, see we're up temperature. Give your spoon a little rinse. If you are with others, the kind of post-COVID protocol changed, and you could either do a double spoon, so spoon out of the bowl with one spoon, pour it onto the second spoon and slurp from that, or spoon to espresso cup or spoon to coffee cup, just so the thing that touches your mouth isn't going back into the bowl. I'm alone here, so I get to go old school on this one. So I'm gonna have a little slurp. Give it a little rinse, it's a habit, and then move into the next one. Now, the first pass, just sate your curiosity. You're just going to be like, how do these taste? Just have a little taste of everything, and don't worry too much about anything. Just know what they taste like. So when we come back again, what we're going to do from our score sheet is pick an attribute. And I would pick one like acidity. I think acidity is a good start. Don't try and get a number from the first sip here. But do you think, okay, there's some acidity there. Is there more or less in bowl 2? I don't know if you want the full slurp. I am gonna end up doing it by mistake in a minute. I may as well get it out of the way. Okay, and then again, just acidity. Spoon, cup 2, more or less acidity, or the same than 3. Now for me, there's a jump there, there's a change. That's interesting. And then 3 to 4. Now you can try and go, from all the coffee I've ever tasted, I'll rate the acidity based on that. And so, I think that's, I'm not telling you the answer. You could say that's a medium acidity, or if you've only ever drunk low acidity coffees, that would be a high acidity coffee, right? Or you could just say, for the table today, which one's the highest gets a high ranking, which one's the lowest gets the low ranking. You can use it like that as well. There's no right and wrong on score sheets like this. Then you can move into attributes like sweetness, like body. So I'm going to turn myself down a little bit. I'm going to cup some coffees, clean some coffees up as well and be a little bit busy. I want you now, just taste your way through, work your way through the score sheet if you have it. Don't focus on flavor yet. Don't focus on trying to find the perfect word. If one jumps out, put it down, but tasting time. cleaning time. I don't like being filmed doing this. It's very stressful. All right. Let's have another little. Get some hot water. Let's check in on you lot. How you doing? Now, thank you so much. Let's go back. I'm going to talk again now. So let's bring my volume back up. Hello again, it's me. I've returned, sound-wise. How you all doing? How are you getting on? Now, a lot of you, and this is really interesting, are throwing opinions into the chat. If you are trying to do this in the strictest possible way, try not to look. Try not to have opinions, because I would say already from just the 4 roasters now that I've tasted, the variance in cups, I would say so far for me, has come probably more from roaster than from process, which is really interesting. Now, one of the things about being a coffee roaster is you will tend to have limited options for decaf coffee. It might be that you have you're buying sort of spot offerings. That is, you're just buying held decaf stock that you draw down as you need. So if you watch the Swiss Water video, a big part of their business is holding decaf coffees that people can kind of draw down on. Other roasters who are doing their own decafs will have one preferred or maybe 2 preferred suppliers that will do the decaffeination for them, and it could be whether they can get a slot with one or with the other, but it's rarely a choice. So a roaster will often have a great familiarity with one particular style of decaffeination without necessarily being familiar with all of them in terms of roasting. Now, we made a little Discord channel for the participating roasters to talk about roasting the coffees in there, talk about all sorts of stuff, which was really interesting. They all had different approaches to roasting these. Some had a load of very specific experience with stuff like Swiss Water and were new to processes like EA or the CO2 process from CR32. So, really interesting part of this whole thing. Just quickly, I'm going to turn myself down to have a quick taste through the bottom half of these. They're a little bit hot, but we should be able to get something out of there. And then we can come back and maybe have a look at a couple of questions that might have come through. We'll see. But anyway, let me turn myself down so I can have a good slurp without upsetting your eardrums too much. Back to you again. All right, I'm just going to have a quick look at some questions because some of you have submitted some questions. Now we've cupped these in a particular order. The order was the video order for us that we released them in, except we didn't make a video about the caffeinated coffee. So I suppose we did CR3, then we did Coffee and Company, and then we did Swiss Water Decaf. And that's kind of the order we've kept them in today. You could have done them in any order. There's no real requirement. I could argue that you probably should have put the caffeinated coffee at the end, but actually I think a lot of people would want to taste this as a benchmark and then have a kind of comparative point to that, which I think is interesting. I don't think any roaster has necessarily applied the same roast profile to all of these coffees. That was a question we had about, in the case of Square Mile, I can answer more easily. When you're roasting a coffee, one of your big considerations is how much moisture is in the raw coffee going in. And so, you need to get rid of most of the moisture for most of the interesting browning reactions to happen. And so the more moisture there is in the coffee, the more heat you may have to apply early on. This is a very broad generalization, and there's a lot of things like density and structure to play with. But ultimately, a coffee that is of a higher moisture content will need more energy than a coffee that, to dry it effectively, than a coffee with lower moisture content. The decafs did not all have identical moisture contents coming from each of the different processes. They all have a window they work with. I think we talked about it in some cases. I think Swiss Water was like aiming for 10.5. I think the EA and the CO2 processes both have a slightly wider band. And I think they were both, slightly higher moisture content on arrival into most roasters as well. Now, obviously, the journey that the coffee takes from a decaffeinator onwards could potentially play a role in its moisture content. But it would mean you would need to approach all of these individually. And so I think the goal for everyone has been, how do I find a balanced, developed roast for each of these individual coffees that I feel like, this is how we might present it as a roaster if this was the only coffee we're roasting, and not just trying to find a universal profile to apply across everything. So I think everything is a kind of tailored approach from that perspective. Oh, I'm enjoying this. So as a reminder, my order, first coffee is the caffeinated coffee. Next one up is the CO2 process, then the EA process, and then Swiss Water on the end here. So that's your 1, 2, 3, 4 that we've got going on. I want to taste these again. I'm quite enjoying myself. I feel like I'm slightly less stressed than I was 20 minutes ago. Trying to keep my slurps gentle while the volume's up. Now, this is interesting just to look at the chat and see a bunch of different responses and experiences with different decaffeinations. They are tasty. We have a little look-see. I'll do a couple more quick questions, just while I go back and gently slurp a few more of these. These were a bit hot, and they've cooled down again now, so. Now, people have asked which roasters I have here. I decided not to say because there were so many great roasters involved. We didn't want to be seen to be like playing favorites because we weren't playing favorites. We bought a bunch of kits and we worked out we could probably only get 6 more on the table here. So we picked 6, but we're not going to go into which 6. A bunch from the different geographies involved around the world. Yeah, it's been fun to sort of taste these different interpretations. So tasting through, just quickly, are we okay for me to talk a little bit more about what I'm tasting now? Or you feel like you've had the chance to taste enough that we can get into some sort of, let me know in the chat, whether I can start telling you what I'm tasting. Let me see what my question's doing. Okay, then let's talk about it. Let's talk about the coffee. So the caffeinated coffee, obviously we had to start with a benchmark for this whole thing. We cupped a few different coffees. I think early on, we decided to work with Caravella, which meant we were probably going to work with the Colombian coffee. And I actually felt that we were likely to find something that would fit the bill, which for me was a clean, sweet, gently fruited kind of coffee, right? Like for me, this coffee has some nice fruit in there. It's got some acidity. It's not screamingly acidic by any stretch in terms of this roast for me. And interesting, as you go through the roasters, some have dialed up and down the roast level, but it does have some nice kind of clean fruit in there. Sometimes it's kind of a little bit berry-like, depends on the roast. Sometimes it gets a little appleier, but it's, for me, fresh, clean fruit. It's not a fermented fruit in any particular way. And it's interesting that it is there through all of these. The reason we picked a coffee like this is that I felt that was a kind of fair coffee to use to see the impact of decaf. We could have taken a very aromatic coffee, take something super floral and super fruity, and you would have found that maybe a lot of that was retained and other stuff was changed, and it would make you think that you always retain all the fruit, all the florals in these very aromatic coffees. Equally, we needed enough complexity in there that you could sort of see if something went missing. So that was why we picked this. And it's a tasty coffee, a very enjoyable coffee, and I think universally appealing. I think it's an easy to enjoy coffee for everyone. Let's talk about the CO2. Now, it's easier for me to be more specific with the square mile roasts. The CO2 is a little drop in acidity and a little drop in body for me. Flavor stays very similar. And it's interesting, body for me is one of those places where I see some variance between the cups, that kind of fullness, that texture there. I don't know on a chemical level what drives that. I'm sure there are people that have a good idea. I'm not one of them, or certainly not enough that I would be comfortable firing from the hip on that. As I move through the other roasters here, there's retained aromas and fruitiness in all of these. If anything, it feels just slightly more delicate. Though that isn't universal. There's roasters here that have played with roast and pushed the roast on this one a little further, made it a little bit more developed. And it makes me feel like when it comes to a lot about a coffee's mouthfeel and texture, roasting is such a big lever to pull, and roast profile has such a big impact. It's kind of fascinating. I will say, as you go from 1 to 2, if you go from caffeinated to any of the decafs, I think a lot of people are probably pretty surprised not to see a bigger jump in flavor, in character. Do you know what I mean? I think a lot of people's expectations coming into this whole project were, I'm going to really taste some big differences from these different processes. These different solvents, these entirely different processes will have a really big impact on flavor. And it does have an impact on flavor, I'm not arguing that, but I think it's probably a lot smaller than many people were expecting. And so if you are tasting these being like, they're very similar, yeah, they kind of are. There are differences. There are differences. And I think a number of people have spotted that you'll get them a little bit more in the finish. You know what I mean? Like the way that they finish. The decafs have a slightly decaf, flavor to the finish. Let's move into the EA. Now EA, this is one which was good for me to taste actually. It is, for me, slightly fruitier, and that's something I kind of had in my head, and this is one where I worry about my own biases here, that often EA decafs were a touch fruitier than other decaf methods. And I don't know if I'm just messing with my own brain on this one, because I'm not cupping these blind, which is perhaps a mistake. It's not, I think some people see ethyl acetate and they have oh no, it's going to taste of like something terrible, of chemicals or something like that. Has nice sweetness, nice body, nice texture, nice aromatics. As I go back to the first coffee, I think this roast, from Square Mile anyway, is a touch lighter. And I think a good bit of what I'm tasting in the difference here is that the end color on this is fractionally lighter. I think the roast was a little different. And so some of the acidity that's in here feels more a byproduct of roast than it does of kind of decaffeination chemistry, for want of a better term. Let's have a quick slurp through. Yeah. It's for me, both of these so far have been very clean, very enjoyable, very easy to drink. I don't feel like I'm missing out on a lot by the reduction and removal of caffeine, if I'm honest. You know, I think the good thing about this project so far for me is that I feel like hopefully it's leveling up people's expectations of decaf. Like, it should be better than it often is, because coffee's great, but I don't always want to drink caffeine. Caffeine kind of annoys me a lot of the time. Let's just check in and see how you're doing. All right, let's have a little taste of the Swiss water process. Now for me, about to contradict myself, but there feels like a kind of bump in texture here. It feels fuller and heavier and a little richer. I'm curious if that is roast, if that's process, I just don't know. It's a little less on the sort of aromatic end of things. It still has plenty of flavor and character, but it just feels a little sort of richer and fuller as I taste it with this roast on this day in this comparative tasting. I should, of course, go and taste a bunch more. Fascinating, in particular for me, because this one is one where I'm seeing quite a big variance in the different roasters. Some of these are sort of that heavier, kind of fuller profile. Some are perhaps the fruitiest of the roasts from that particular roaster. It's just really interesting. I will say, this is kind of a head-wrecking. It's too many coffees. I don't think I can do this justice. This is beyond the skill of someone like me. Maybe a super professional, full-time cupper, someone who's tasting a lot of coffee at origin would be able to make more sense of this. But 34 bowls, my brain can't quite keep up. It was ambitious of me, but it's super interesting nonetheless. I'll jump into a few more questions, just so we have a chance to do that. All right. So one of the things that someone said earlier on is, what is acidity? I just want to answer that question. It's a bit late to answer that question, but it's a good question, so I think we should just answer it. Acidity is one of those nice things because on a very technical level, it's very neatly defined. It's when a hydrogen ion triggers a nerve in your tongue in a taste bud, and the more of hydrogen ions there are, the more your tongue experiences what we call acidity. You'll see tongue maps which are wrong and a lie, and they'll show you acidities tasted down the sides of the tongue. It's not, it's tasted everywhere, but it's experience actually. You tend to feel it down the sides of your tongue. You know, in fruit, it's things like, you know, apples, or like a green apple has tons of acidity. Obviously lemons, limes, citrus has a ton of acidity. In coffee, there are a bunch of acids. Some of them are things like citric acid, which is, you know, you'd find in citrus fruit, or malic acid, or tartaric acid. There's a lot of different organic acids found in coffee. They tend to create the sensation of fruitiness, along with the aromas that you detect retronasally when you swallow or when you slurp. For some people, acidity can be a wonderful thing. You know, just because there's lots or there's none, you know, it's about quantity and quality, I think what I'm trying to get to. A green apple, a lot of acidity, but very lovely. Balanced with sweetness, fresh, crispy, delightful. A lemon, a lot of acidity, not balanced with sweetness the same way. Sour, harsh, less fun. Unless, you know, you'd like to eat lemons, and I know some people do. Not me. I mean, they're lovely in other things. I'm getting off the point. With coffee, you will get more acidity, generally speaking, the higher grown a coffee is, and generally speaking, processes after harvest can impact perceived acidity. You tend to find more acidity in coffees that have been washed post-harvest than, say, honeys or natural processes. Roast plays a big role. The longer you roast coffee, the more acids degrade. So it's this interesting summation of a lot of things. You know, how you brew coffee, the water you use will impact the acidity. It's kind of a nightmare, but it's good. It adds to complexity and enjoyment. All right. I know a few of you out there have probably tasted from multiple roasters. I'm aware some people bought multiple sets. I'm curious if they've had a similar experience where the roasters had a bigger impact on the flavor than the decaffeinator has. Because I think that's probably my summary consideration of this, like my kind of takeaway is that, you know, the decaffeinators present you a canvas to work with. What a roaster does with it is going to have a bigger impact on the final cup than how it was decaffeinated. I don't know how decaffeinators feel about that as a sentence. Part of me is saying these things, and I'm imagining these 3 decaffeination companies that were so kind and so helpful in this project, and I wonder how they feel about me saying that. I don't know. I'm sure they'll tell me. But I think that's it. I think, yeah. All right. Good question. Someone asks, what's the best way to clean your palette between cups? We don't really know. This is something that, you know, long-term professionals have different opinions on. Some of them will use just water as a rinse between. Some of them like very bland biscuits in between. Some like sparkling water, some don't. We haven't really found anything that good. Ultimately, it's something that gets easier with more practice, but you rarely see, you know, much in the way of palette cleansing in a single cupping session. You might have a moment between sessions. So if we did this tasting, cleaned it up, prepped for another one, then you might look at people kind of cleaning palettes. But actually, as they bounce between coffees, you tend not to. I think one of the secrets is to sort of alternate differently. If you haven't tasted your coffees now, they're nearly what, like an hour old? Not quite, probably 40 minutes old. This is when they're at their most tasteable. The differences will be the strongest and the starkest at this point. Cheers. Yeah. I really think the finish is a great place to pay attention. I feel like that first hit, let the coffees just fade for a little bit, take a little longer between slurps as you compare and contrast, because I feel those differences really do manifest quite nicely in the finish. Let me come back to some more questions. Let me just check my tabs. There we go. People are in agreement on the roasters being that way. Sorry for the excess sloping. I did, you know, I know it's tricky. I wish there was a way around this. Now, that's a good question. If you have been filling out a score sheet, don't throw it away. At some point, I'd like to find a way to capture your data. We're going to put together probably a form next week that will let you say which roaster's coffee you tasted, and then, you know, what your tasting notes from it were. I don't expect everyone to do this. It's a lot of time and effort to kind of feed in and digitize your data from this, but we will put together a little simple survey just to try and collect as much data as we can. We'll try and share it with as many people as possible. So if you've used a score sheet, if you've taken notes, please, please, please keep them. We do want them. It'll be super interesting to see if we get some smart data people involved, whether there's some trends that we can pick out from this whole thing. How are we doing for time? We're getting close to our hour. Just checking in here. Forgive me, I don't like not talking. It feels weird to not talk, but I've got to read. I can't do 2 things at once. This has been, I'm curious, I mean, I'm hopeful to hear from you that this has been quite a surprising experience. This is, for me, worth the pain and effort of doing this. Obviously, this was, you know, as these big event tastings go, this was a kind of progression for us. It's by no means a perfect thing. We still lots of things we'd like to improve. There's still, in future tastings, things we'd like to overcome and get more people involved in more parts of the world. how we do that in the future is a question, but it's something we're interested in. But it was a lot of work to do this. Thank you again to all of the 3 decaffeinators and to Caravella especially, because all the logistics of this were really key to everything actually working, and their logistical capacity and support and help invaluable, and without it, it could not have happened. Thank you to the team here, and again, thank you to all the roasters who took part in this. They took a gamble. It was not cheap to buy, 280 kilos of these coffees. They'd been, decaffeinated and moved around the world. It was a risk, and I'm glad they took part, and I hope they've had a fun time doing it. And to get this experience to as many people as possible has been very exciting. And I don't know if anyone will do this again. It's a lot of work. It's quite hard to do, but I'm glad we've done it, because I feel like I've learned a ton. And I think the nice thing about this, the thing I was worried about this whole project, was that somehow I'd come out of this with a sort of more closed mind, in that I might have an opinion on, well, actually I like this, but not that. Or, oh, decaf can never be X, Y, or Z. I worry it would close a part of my brain down. For me, I would say the opposite. It's opened it up a little bit wider. It's made me more open to different processes, more open to the potential of what we can do. I feel like, even for Square Mile, taking part of this, working through these coffees has been a learning experience that will probably impact and improve our decafs going forward, because, everything like that should. And we were already trying very hard on decaf, but I think a chance to learn more and again, open our mind and improve our expectations. So that bit of it for me is a massive success, and that's something I hope for you. I hope that you maybe came into this potentially with a favorite. You're like, well, I've always drunk X process and that's my favorite, and now you're like, well, I would try another process. It's not going to hold me back. I'm going to go and pay more attention to the coffee and who produced it, and that's going to drive my purchasing decision. I'm not going to worry about decaffeination process, because it's going to do a good job, and if the roast is good, they're going to do a good job, and I can take, you can taste the hard work that went into growing and creating that coffee in the first place, which is kind of the goal of this entire specialty coffee movement, I guess. You know what I mean? To enjoy the taste of the thing from the place. That's what we want. Okay, that's a moment of philosophy done with. Let me just check in on the chat and some questions. I would say, if you've enjoyed this, do shout out the roasters you've enjoyed the coffees from. Tag them in any of your socials. Be nice to them. Just say thank you. If they've done a good job, I hope they have. I mean, everyone I've tasted coffee from here has done an amazing job. So shout out again to everyone who made this thing happen. I'll do a few more questions, but we are getting to our hour. We said this would be about an hour. We're going to run slightly over, because I feel like I should do a few more questions, and then we will wrap up in a minute. All right. Okay, if you're watching this, you've come in late and you didn't get a kit, I will say there are a few left. A bunch of roasters held a few kits back in case some got lost in the mail to people who purchased them early on. If you go to the decafproject.com, you can still buy kits from a few roasters. They are not many. I'll say that now. There's not many left, but if you do want to grab one, if you've missed out and you still want to take part, do so. There's I think a good amount left, but spread between a few different roasters. So if you want to take part, be quick. If you want to taste another roaster's version of it, be quick. You could still give it as a little gift, potentially, to somebody. Give them this experience. They can watch this video again later, taste along with me, and have some fun. All right, questions. Yes, I would like a kettle that could do 4 at a time, though I'd probably just make a mess. That was a good point there. Interesting, there's some real variation in people who've just gone very hard for one, others who are like, I can't really tell the difference between them. The nice thing is you're probably both right. You might like that one roast profile rather than the raw coffee. I don't think, even unless you tasted a bunch of roasters' coffees, I think I wouldn't live in the I'm this process forevermore. You know what I mean? I would still be interested in trying that process from a different roaster or a different coffee at a different profile, because I feel like from my experience, the roaster's having a bigger role on the flavor, the end flavor, than the decaffeinator is. I think the producer first, roaster second, decaffeinator third, and then when you brewed it, you had a big impact as well. So well done if you made some tasty coffee. All right. We'll throw in a few random questions. Sorry for the beeps today. Where are we up to? Where's my... Everyone else asks about the jumpers. Somehow I always end up reading the jumper question. I believe this jumper is from Folk, wherever they are. I think they're a UK company. I don't know. All right. All right, I think, unless anyone's got any big old questions, if there's something very obvious that I haven't touched on, is there anything obvious I haven't touched on? Anyone just in the room want to do this? All right, well, we've tasted for an hour. Thank you for taking part in a, what I think is a world first, in a very large, giant collaborative experience. I don't know the actual numbers, we're trying to get final numbers from roasters, but there's somewhere between, we think 30 and 40,000 kits were produced and sold. I don't know how many have been delivered or anything else like that, but that's the rough number that we are speculating on. We don't have final numbers yet from every roaster on how many kits they've sold, but we think that's the ballpark there. The last world's largest coffee tasting was, I think, 17,500 kits, so this was at least twice the size of that. So if you've taken part in this, you have taken part in what we believe to be, so far, one of the biggest coffee collaborations ever, which is kind of fun. And we think we can go bigger in the future, but we've learned a lot doing this, so thank you. And that's kind of, I think, that's going to be it. I have very much enjoyed streaming with you here today. I do find live streams reasonably terrifying. I do like to edit things before you see them. But it's fun to do these big live streams. I hope you've had fun tasting along. I hope you had a chance to taste something new. I hope your mind's a little more open to the world of decaf. I hope you demand more of your roaster. If the decaf's not good, you should tell them. Make them make better decaf, because decaf's great. We could all drink more decaf, and that would be good, because it's delicious. Anyway, that's it from me today. I'm very grateful to everyone who took part. Shout out again to Caravella for all the work, to the 3 decaffeinators, to CR3, Coffee & Company, and Swiss Water Decaf, and all of those 50, 60 roasters that took part. Thank you all. And thank you for watching, for tasting, for enjoying. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.